Welcome back to Coffee with Kish. I'm Kish, and we're here to geek out about Mormonism. So, this is going to be another shorter episode, and it's all about things like seerstones, divining rods, about divination. So, treasure digging often involved divination and tools of divination, little branches called divining rods that were used to point the way to treasure, to lost items, or seer stones. A seer would have a stone, a special stone that was revealed to that seer, that the seer would go dig up and be able to look into to see lost items, buried treasure, things in the other world, spiritual realities, you might say. Now that's divination. Now, a lot of us are familiar with divination in its most popularized form in astrology, in the newspaper, where the alignment of stars and planets, constellations, heavenly bodies, influence are deemed to have influence on events, on people. Modern astrology is very much psychologized, and this has to do with the sort of psychologization of the occult that occurred in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. You can read about this if you're a student of the work of Aleister Crowley, Dion Fortune. The occultists of the early 20th century knew the budding field of psychology. They read psychological works and they applied them to their esoteric practices. And so astrology changed in reaction to the budding field of psychology. But it's still thought of as divination. Divination is really all around us today. Most of us probably don't really see ourselves as participating in it, but maybe we do, and we're just not really aware that we're doing it. Some popular forms of bibliomancy and modern Christianity would be, did I say bibliomancy? I used the word bibliomancy already. Some popular forms of divination would include bibliomancy, where you open up to a random page of the Bible and put your finger down and then view the passage that your finger lands on as a message to you from God. I actually did this kind of thing a couple of times on my mission, and at the time I believed it worked. So there's bibliomancy, there's astrology, there's water witching. That's probably one of the most non-occultish, non-occult-like uses of divination in the modern world. Now, of course, it's used less and less, but you could hire a person who would go find water on your property using these little divining rods. They would hold rods that almost look like little bent metal sticks, and they'd have two of them, and they'd kind of hold them together, follow them around, see where they crossed, and where they crossed, I believe. I haven't seen this done since I was since the 1970s in person, but revelation here on my family's property out in the country in Northern Virginia. We needed to dig a well, and so my parents called this water diviner who came out and used the sticks and to help us find a place to dig a well. And so we found that, we dug the well, there's water there, and it all worked out for us. Now, we can get into the science and why that, that's more like finding a jet plane at the airport than it is than finding a needle in a haystack. But in any case, that's what we did. I've seen it done in person, and it's really a form of divination. Well, Joseph Smith and his family used such tools in their treasure digging practices. And Joseph Smith used a seerstone, one of these divining instruments, in the process of translating the Book of Mormon. So, but over time, the use of such devices in Mormon culture has kind of fallen out of favor. I would say over the course of the 20th century, most of these kinds of things stopped being used. But, in maybe you would call it Mormon folk culture, seerstones and divining rods had a certain cachet and popularity. I'm here today not to go through all of that with you. There are still people today who identify as Mormons who use tools of divination like that. It's not something they probably parade around in an LDS ward. Because, it's maybe kind of a taboo subject these days, even though Joseph Smith and his compatriots, some of the early Mormon converts, were diviners. Oliver Cowdery, who helped in the translation of the Book of Mormon, he had a divining rod, and it's referred to in veiled language in the Doctrine and Covenants, one of the books of Mormon scripture. Now, I said in veiled language, if you were to read that passage today and it says gift of Aaron, you wouldn't have any idea that it's actually referring to a divining rod, but indeed it is. If you go back to earlier editions of the same revelations, you'll see the language change over time, and what was once referred to as the sprout, I think in one of the earlier versions, is now called the gift of Aaron. But one of the reasons I find the period of the 1820s, the discovery of the Book of Mormon, so interesting is that, to me, it's the world of these diviners, plural, getting together, and the Book of Mormon coming out of that confluence of divining activity out there in Western New York. That activity was very much at the time about finding lost treasure, but it wasn't just about finding lost treasure. And I don't think you can fairly say that treasure digging was ever just about the treasure. I think it was a lot richer than that. Michael Quinn, in his book Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, kind of gets into that a little bit. But I think that treasure digging was about connecting with the past. So you get these European settlers who come to this new land, and it's, in their minds, practically a tabula rasa, a blank slate. It's not that it is a tabula rasa. Of course, the native peoples who lived here had a deep relationship with the land, a sacred relationship with the land, and it was where they drew their livelihood. It was their homes. But to the European settlers, they didn't really have a frame of reference. And when you don't have a frame of reference, you need to sort of build a narrative that helps you get your hooks into the land and helps you orient yourself in your environment. European settlers not having that, they found different ways of turning the unfamiliar into something that they could understand, sort of translating it into a world that they could understand. One of the ways they did that is by renaming things, naming, a place in New York after York in England. It's just the new version, or adopting other places from the Eastern Hemisphere, place names like Palmyra, or I don't want to. What's another good one? Let me see. There's a Cairo, Georgia. That's another good example. There's a Cairo, Georgia, that's spelled like Cairo. Well, it's named after Cairo, Egypt, but Georgians today pronounce that Cairo. And that's part of the process of getting yourself fixed in the land. You use narratives, you use names, you use history. And another thing you can do is you can make up a past. Now, this was done in the Eastern Hemisphere a long time ago. We have very clear examples of it in the process of Greek colonization. Now, some of you may know something about the modern country of Greece, and something about its geography, landscape, climate, etc., etc. It's a very relatively small, dry, and rugged country. Of course, there are some lush parts of it, but there isn't a whole lot of, or in antiquity, there wasn't a lot of arable land to go around. Well, as the ancient Greek population rose, that put a strain on the agricultural resources that these little Greek cities had, so they sent out colonies, and they sent these colonies out all over the Mediterranean. And so Greek metropolises, or mother cities, sent out colonies, and the colonies kept up this nice reciprocal relationship with those mother cities over time. And sometimes these colonies themselves, having landed in a much more fertile area with much more arable land, could eclipse their mother cities in their prosperity. Now, what did they do when they got there? They started telling stories. They wrote their new homes into Greek mythology, and they would say things like, well, the Greek hero Odysseus must have visited this place, and he slept with a local nymph and gave birth to a hero, and that hero is our ancestor. So they would make up the past. Well, I'm going to say this, and, this is an edict perspective, it's not how an insider would view it, but in a way, I think this is what's going on with the Book of Mormon. It's writing a Christian myth that's set in the unfamiliar environment of the New World, and therefore kind of familiarizing, making this new land something that Mormons could connect with by giving it this new Christian mythology. And this isn't the only example of this happening. Ethan Smith's book that traced the Native Americans back to the Israelites was basically a forerunner to this. There were people already doing this in the New World. They were trying to see how the New World was connected to the Old World, and where they didn't have evidence, or they only had little bits of things that looked familiar to them, they would just come up with these dramatic theories that said, oh, well, we have pyramids in America. Well, that must be because Egyptians came here from Egypt and they built pyramids. And, I'm giving you some rough examples, but I think in a way the Book of Mormon fits into this category. It just does so in a spiritual and religious way. Divination, treasure digging, that's part of the process. Because divination that deals with the land, that helps you find things in the land, that helps you find buried treasure in the land, it's helping you reveal the secrets that are buried in the land, right? That makes your landscape have this particular mythology. And the Book of Mormon is striking. It really stands out in this way because of, the volume of mythology that's there. It's a book of over 500 pages. It's not just a little tale that you might read in a newspaper or some letter that someone sent a friend in the 19th century. It's not part of a novel or a short story or an account of treasure digging that you might get in Benjamin Franklin or Edgar Allan Poe. It's a big, full-bodied mythological system here about Israelites who become Christians in the New World, then fall into wickedness and have their civilization collapse. That's a big thing. So much rich stuff there. That's coming through this this divination. Divination is in the Bible, of course. It's found in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Casting lots to find a new apostle, for example, in the New Testament. So, not unknown. Divination is part of the Western experience, the Western religious experience. Lots of us are familiar with it in one form or another. Mormonism had its own distinctive divination culture that comes out of the treasure digging practices of Joseph Smith and the new kind of significance those practices had within Mormonism itself. So, I'm going to tell you how my personal experience fits into this. Don't be disappointed when I say that I'm not a diviner. I don't have a seerstone or a divining rod, and I never have had a seerstone or a divining rod. But I have stories about Mormon divination that come from my experience growing up. So I, as you know, come from a Mormon family, and it's one that goes back to pioneer days, goes as far back as the 1830s, so it has a deep connection to Mormon history. In some ways, my family was more Mormon than it was American. I mean, American is Mormon, they really belong together, but I think Mormon is a very distinctive subset, or used to be a kind of distinctive subset of American. And in some ways, I felt more tied to my Mormonness in time than I felt to my Americanness, as odd as that may sound. And why is that? I think it's partly because a number of my ancestors, when they came to this country, they weren't coming here to be Americans. They were coming to this country to go to Zion, to be Mormons. So they just skipped the eastern United States altogether. They travel through it and they go out to their new home, their true home, which is in Utah, before Utah became a state and before the railroad came through. So pioneer era, every member of my family, every ancestor that I have traces to someone who arrived in Utah before the railroad. They're definite pioneer people. And I don't say that to brag, but I'm trying to help you understand where the deep Mormon identity comes in here. And that maybe helps you understand why, even though I'm ex-LDS and that I don't affiliate with the LDS Church, I still very much feel Mormon. And if people want to say, well, you're not a Mormon because you don't go to the LDS Church. I get their point. I'm not going to get into an argument with them or anything, but inside I'm like, well, nerds to you. and likewise, if an ex-LDS person comes to me and says, why do you even care about that stuff? I remember I had one friend who said, why do you worry about that BS anymore? Very rudely. Didn't say BS, said the actual full church. I was like, I felt a little bit sad. It's like, okay, fair enough. That's how you choose to play it with your past, and I do respect that. But for me, I don't look at it as BS. It's an important part of who I am. Anyway, so I have these couple of little weird stories. One of them comes from a member of my grandmother's family, one of her brothers. She had a really, I would say, kind of an eccentric family. And she loved telling stories about them. I'd love to go to my grandmother's house in Southern California in the summertime, and she would tell me these amazing stories, sometimes disturbing stories, about her brothers, whom she idolized. Her brothers walked on water. They were giants among men, the best people ever, and she, clearly absolutely adored them. She had a couple of, a few of her brothers were still alive. And I think one of the younger brothers, he was always an eccentric kind of guy. I actually met him and spent some time with him. He lived in the mountains in Southern California. I stayed at his mountain home, and One day we went around looking for gold. I'm visiting my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, and we're going out looking for gold. And okay, that's not what we do often on summer holiday, school break, is go around with our great uncles looking for gold. And it doesn't stop there, because it's not like he had a geological survey and he was going into gold mines that were closed or anything. Of course, that would have been dangerous, and I don't think he would have done that. He wasn't a completely irresponsible person, but he was eccentric. What he had was this little thing on a chain that looked like a plumb bob. It almost looked like a very it looked like a turnip on a diet, or a radish on a diet. It was this little, almost pendulum looking thing that was bronze or brass in color on a chain. And what he would do is he would open it up and put a coin of a particular kind of metal in there. And then he would hold up the chain, and watch the thing sway and see which direction it went to. And if it started tending in a certain direction, he would walk in the direction of where it was swaying. I didn't have any box to put this in. I mean, I was just speechless. I was an observer. I was in elementary school. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if this was real or if it worked. I think I was, even as a kid, kind of skeptical, but there was part of me that really admired this guy. I mean, he was dynamic, he was creative, he was adventurous, he was gutsy. He fancied himself to be an inventor. He claimed to have invented the push button toilet. Now you're getting to the eccentric part, right? He claimed that he was designing an engine, a car engine that would get over 100 miles to the gallon. And now we're in the 70s, we're in the OPEC crisis, so any person who's coming along and saying, I'm going to invent an engine that gets over 100 miles of gas, 100 miles to the gallon, is going to be attracting attention. And he actually pulled this engine block out from under his bed to show us, saying, this is my engine. It's coming together. It was an engine block, I have no idea of the reality. I didn't know what to think. I could see that this kind of made my grandfather a little bit uncomfortable, but he would just kind of chuckle nervously and sit there and kind of go with the flow, and I kind of just followed his lead in that. But he walked us all around the mountains there with his plumb bob, and he would say, if you dug here, you would find gold. And then he would just move on. But where it got kind of embarrassing was when he took us to a local zoo there in his mountain community, and he breaks out in the middle of the zoo when it's open, open to the public. There are people walking around. He breaks out this device, and he's looking for gold, and finally he attracts the attention of the people who work at the zoo, and some guy sort of sidles up to him and says, sir, what exactly are you doing? And he's like, oh, it's a plumb bob. And that's what he would say. He would say, it's a plumb bob. Nothing to see here, folks. This is what goes on when people do surveys, blah, blah, blah. But under his breath, he's like, oh, yeah, this is looking good. If we came here and dug after dark, we'd come back, we'd find gold here. So eventually, though, the guy, he's suspicious of my great uncle. He comes by, he's like, no, come on, tell me. I mean, what is this? What are you doing? And he whispers, hey, okay, I'll fess up here. This is what's going on. This is an instrument that I use to find gold. And now let me show you. If you come here after dark and dig in this spot right here, and he shows the guy, you're going to find gold there. And I was just blown away. I mean, I had no idea what was going on. I just thought, wow, I don't know that I believe this. Here I am in elementary school with my great uncle in the summertime. And it was just quite an experience. So that's my first divining story. So, what do you do with this? it's not exactly a divining rod. It's not exactly a seerstone. But here you have a member of an old Mormon family, one that goes back to Salt Lake, one that actually goes back to, the very early Mormon church in Kirtland, Ohio. This is a family that grew up in a community that was used to divination practices. And I think he was one of those people who was comfortable with that interest. So, and obviously he was doing it himself, right? Okay, so that's that. That's my great uncle. And I think that's really the most exciting story that I have to tell on. The other one is just a small story. I talked about this with my grandfather who went through all of this with me. We were all out together with my uncle as he was looking for gold, and we started talking about this stuff. And he said that, in one of his old wards, this is my mother's father, he knew a guy who had a crystal that he would use to find water. And this is something that members of his congregation knew about, and that, people would call on him to use his crystal to find water. Is this unique to Mormons? No, by no means is it unique to Mormons. But it certainly comes, the Mormons, they come by it honestly, so to speak, in that they come out of this culture where divination practices are at the root. At the root of Mormonism is this divination culture. So, when I had these experiences, I did not know about the seerstone. I did not know about the divining rods. I did not know about Joseph Smith's treasure digging. I remember when I was in public school, I may have been in middle school, I was with some friends, and one of them was ridiculing my religion, and he said, that Joseph Smith, he read the Book of Mormon by putting a rock in a hat, and he was ridiculing it and making fun of me, and I was like, no, he didn't. So I'd never heard of this. I had no idea. That wouldn't be the last time I had an experience like that. I had plenty of those experiences on my mission when I encountered anti-Mormon literature that would quote early Mormon non-canonical, non-official doctrine texts that had lots of crazy things in them. Not the last time I'd be embarrassed, but it sticks in my mind because it really tells you something that here this kid, for a mean purpose, was bullying me and making fun of me by making fun of Joseph Smith, using a rock in the hat to translate the seerstone. You call it a rock in the hat, and it's already disparaging, but using a seerstone to translate the Book of Mormon, and I was mortified, and at the same time, I was a kid who was spending time with his Mormon relatives in the West, who knew about divination practices. Some of them were using divination practices, and it took years and years for me to put them together. But when I put them together, I was like, oh, of course. Okay, I've got a place to put this. I know what's going on, and really this makes sense. And so it was interesting for me because as these histories about Joseph Smith's divination practices became more widely known, and people started to get upset, just like I was upset to be bullied with this story about Joseph Smith with the rock in the hat. I reacted differently, I think, from some other people because I thought, well, yeah, okay. I mean, I can contextualize this. I'm not actually surprised about it, and I'm not really that upset about it. I think it's more of a problem that we're uncomfortable with this, but it's because we don't know our own history in the way that maybe we should now that this information is out there. All right, well, that's enough for today. Divination in early Mormonism, divination as I experienced it within my Mormon family. This is Kish, Coffee with Kish. Always love the flavor. Thank you. Subscribe, like the video, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.